Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 mini-series with the New York Yankees. And we are closing in on the midway point of the 2025 season, and it's been a very mediocre season for our Yankees, a 39-40 record, fourth place in the AL East, 9.5 behind the Rays. But we are playing better of late after a brutal start to the season. We've won 5 in a row, 7 of our last 10, and honestly, we've been one of the better teams in baseball thus far over the course of the month of June. So given that we've dug ourselves out of a very big hole that we started the season with, I can't remember the exact record. We can go look at it here, but we lost 3 out of 4 to Boston in March to start the season. Yeah, so we got off to a 1-13 start. So to be sitting here at almost 500 in late June after a 1-13 start makes me think that we perhaps got a bit unlucky in those first couple weeks of the season. And at the end of our last episode, we talked about a few things. We talked about some of the contracts we might want to get out from, some of the players we might want to move on from, and also the fact that our two best offensive players, Juan Soto and Aaron Judge, are both on the IL right now, but hopefully they'll be back in the next couple of weeks. Would expect even Judge that we'll be seeing him by the time we get back from the All-Star break. So we're not in a bad situation there, but despite both of those players being on the IL, we have traded away a couple of first base / outfield types. I think these moves make sense, though, so we'll go through them. We are out on DJ LeMahieu. We traded him away. Oakland, interestingly, was willing to take on a good chunk of his contract. We had to keep 35% of his contract, so we're still going to be on the hook for material dollars the rest of this year and next year. But given that LeMahieu is now a proven well below average offensive player, and he doesn't really bring much to the table defensively, he's a really good defensive first baseman for what that's worth. Wanted to get him off the roster while hopefully getting out from as much of his contract as possible and hopefully improve the team in return. And I think we did that in a very minor way. We also had to include Nicky Lopez, who was just a minor league free agent signing of ours that we had stashed in AAA, but certainly a useful glove, particularly to a lower budget team like the A's. And then we had to include Caleb Durbin, who's a marginal prospect. He's 25 years old, and he's never been in the majors yet. He wasn't even playing much at Scranton Wilkes-Barre for us this year, likely because of guys like Lopez who are more experienced and a little better being on the roster. But certainly has a profile that he could be a useful player to a lower budget team in the coming years. So in return, we got Brandon Drury. Not that exciting, 32 years old. He's making good money, and we're on the hook for all of it. But he will be a free agent after this year. And he's kind of, in terms of the positions he can play, similar to what we had with LeMahieu. But he's a bit better defensively, and he's a bit better offensively at this point. Now, admittedly, his WRC plus this year is only 77. But I feel like it's a trade that makes us a little bit better this year because Drury's better than LeMahieu right now, in my opinion. And even though we had to give up Durbin, who's a middling prospect, and Lopez, who is just organizational depth, the ability to get off a good chunk of LeMahieu's contract for next year will help us when we get to free agency as well. And the other trade, also getting rid of a player who was underperforming, Michael Conforto, who we signed this past off season, had high hopes for. hit just 200 with 7 homers and 22 ribbies and 220 at-bats. He also was somewhat negative in the clubhouse. And with the emergence of some minor league outfielders, felt like even with the potential for Soto and Judge to be coming back soon, and hopefully it's not just potential and it will really happen, wanting to ensure that we got Wells some consistent playing time, we felt comfortable moving on from Conforto. We also had to include utility man Jose Rojas, who was up with us last year briefly, spent most of this year in Double-A for us. And then the minor league catcher Edinson Duran, didn't love having to include him. Respectable defensive catcher who looks like he could be borderline useful as a backup, not even 23 years old now. And he was having a pretty nice year for us in Double-A ball. But we no longer have the obligation to pay Conforto next year. And we picked up Sean Manaea, who's another guy who's going to be a free agent after this year. Not a front-end starter, 3-4 this year with a 3.97 ERA. But with the fact that both Clark Schmidt and Marcus Stroman have been pretty disappointing this year, felt like we wanted to stabilize that number 4 spot in our rotation behind Cole, Snell, and Rodon. I think Manaea is better than Schmidt or Stroman. So even though it's just a rental for us, it allowed us to move Schmidt into the bullpen because he has been the least effective of our starters this year. And then we actually sent the youngster Jack Neely down to Triple-A. He's been our worst pitcher out of the bullpen this year, walked 15 batters and allowed 9 home runs in 26 innings. His ratings suggest that he should be a reasonably effective major league pitcher. We did jump him all the way from Double-A to the majors this year. This will give him an opportunity to hopefully get a little more seasoning and maybe develop a little bit more in Triple-A, although according to our scout, there's not a ton of development that needs to take place. But I feel like the LeMahieu trade got money off the books. As I noted, we still have an obligation to him. We're responsible for $5.2 million this year and then another $5.2 million next year. But we've got Stanton and LeMahieu off of the books now to a large extent, which should open up a little more optionality for us this coming off season. The hope is that Stroman will opt out of that final year of his contract. I think it's incredibly unlikely when we look at a 34-year-old who has 40 stuff at this point and not a single pitch that's 35 or better. So it kind of is what it is with the Stroman contract. But we're going to be saving money on Stanton and LeMahieu, as I said. And hopefully the additions of Manaea and Drury as rentals for this year improve the team a little bit on the margin. Still got over a month until we get to the trade deadline. So there's potential for us to do significantly more if we want to. Now, we have definitely depleted our farm system a bit with the guys that we've had to trade away to get some of these contracts off the books, particularly when we had to include Jason Dominguez to get Stanton off the books. So our farm system is not necessarily incredibly deep, but we can take on nearly $8 million in contracts at this point. So we do have some options over the next month if any holes develop in the roster. Otherwise, we're going to kind of see how this team does over the next several weeks and figure out whether or not there is another move we should make. The goal is certainly to get this team in the playoffs. I won't say we're going to do anything to make that happen, since I don't know that we're really necessarily strong World Series contenders. But at the very least, I do want this team to improve from a very mediocre 83-win season last year and get this squad into the playoffs. Actually, it was 84 wins last year. We were projected to win 83 this year. neither of those numbers is acceptable. We need to be back in the playoffs. And we made it to the end of June. As I mentioned, June was an excellent month for the Yankees, and we finished up really strong after we checked in at the beginning of this episode to talk about the 2 trades that we made. Taking a look at our team statistics here after that very slow start in March and April. We were mediocre in May, but we've been excellent in the month of June. 20-8 record for the month. Still middling offensively, tied for 9th in runs scored, and we're 6th in runs allowed. But that 44-41 record that we have at this point is still a game below Pythagorean expectations. And we now sit in 3rd place, just 5.5 behind the Rays after going 9-1 in our last 10. And we're now only 2 out for the wild card. It wasn't that long ago that we were close to double digits out for the wild card, and we had a lot of teams to jump past. So given that we're only 85 games into the season, you think about that 1-13 start, and we're 43-28 since then. So if we continue to play that kind of ball the rest of the season, we'll certainly be a playoff team when all is said and done. And some good news and some bad news for the streaking Yankees here. The bad news is that Arson Judge has had a setback in his recovery from the sprained ankle. Now going to be another 1 to 2 weeks until he's ready to play again. So the hope of having him back, I guess it's still possible we'll have him back because the All-Star break is actually a little late this year. So the All-Star game is 2 weeks from today, or 2 weeks from yesterday, more accurately. So if it's only 1 to 2 weeks, it might still work out okay, and we might get him back right after the All-Star break. So that's the bad news. The good news, though, is that Soto is ready to come off of the IL. We had brought up Christopher Familia to fill in after we made the trade to get rid of Conforto. He only hit a $185 for us in 27 at-bats, so certainly didn't make an overwhelming case to stay in the majors. He's now hit under 200 in both of his relatively small stints with us in the majors. So we are going to send him back to Scranton Wilkes-Barre. Soto back on the roster. Wells hitting 280 with 12 homers and 35 ribbies. Pereira, 340 and 50 at-bats. I think we're going to try to keep them both up even when Judge is ready to come back from his injury. I don't know exactly how that's going to work right now, but we still have time to try to figure that out. And it's been a streaky month of July here. We pushed our winning streak to 9 games before splitting the first 2 games of a series with Texas, but since then we've now lost 4 in a row. So we've dipped back to 4th in the division, 5 games behind. Only a game and a half out of the final wild card spot at this point, though. So again, given the real slow start we had, we're not in a bad spot. Taking a break now for the first-year player draft. This is something that's been talked about in a lot of the chat rooms and on the OOTP forum, but I still think they may need to do a little more tweaking on this topic because the player draft pool is just putrid. We're picking 16th for the Yankees, which is very early, and we have a very good scout, and you can see we've got very high scouting accuracy on these players. There's one batter in the entire draft that we think has potential over 2.5 stars, and it's honestly not much better for the pitchers, where there's only 5 pitchers that our scout thinks have 2.5 star or over 2.5 star potential. And you can see there's only about 15 pitchers in the entire draft that have more than 2-star potential. So I did start this version before the first patch came out, so I don't have the benefit to the changes that they've already made here. But hopefully they're pretty significant because this draft is even at the number 16 spot. We're likely to be picking a player who is borderline to ever really be a useful major leaguer. And I think part of the fun of the game is kind of having some higher potential players that you can kind of hope for the future with, and particularly with the enhancements that have been made to the game this year with the development focuses and the development lab, players that you can really try to guide and develop in their baseball journey to become someone who's a useful player for you down the line. And if there's just no potential at all out there, kind of makes the game less immersive and kind of defeats the purpose of the draft if there's no talent for the future. So I trust that by the time I begin my long-term play, which will likely be sometime in early April, most, if not all, of the little issues in the game will be ironed out. But I'm not going to waste a lot of time giving you insight on what we do in the draft this year, because I think everyone we draft is going to be pretty uninspiring. And I guess the only thing I can say here as I lie to you and admit that I lied to you, because I've come right back for our first pick, is that another thing that people have brought up in some of the forums is that it seems like pitchers just don't get drafted very high. And that seems to be the case here, because we've got our option of any pitcher in the draft here with the 16th pick overall, since none of them have been selected. It's been all batters thus far. I'm going to take a look at the hitters offline, but tend to think that I'll probably gravitate towards one of the more highly regarded pitchers. And I've lied to you again. The lies just won't stop. I'm actually not going to go with one of the pitchers. I looked at them and they all had some pretty big holes in their game. I had gone through the position players and I had kind of honed in on Carter Smith, shortstop, as a guy that I liked. And as it turns out, he's also the guy that our scouting director recommends. He's a little over slot, but we've got excess money right now, so that's not an issue. Looks like a solid glove, a little bit of speed, and he does have the potential to hit a few home runs and draw a few walks if he completely develops. Making contact and striking out are likely to be the potential issues, but there's not a ton of great options here, and an infielder who could be a useful fielder with a little pop in his bat and the ability to draw some walks, to me, is the most attractive option here at number 16 in the first round. So we're going to go ahead and meet Carter Smith's demand and welcome him to the Yankees organization. And we've made it to the second round, and you can see batters. There's only 4 players rated higher than 2 stars that are still available. There actually still are a couple of the 3-star starting pitchers. I'm probably going to grab one of them. I didn't love them as first rounders. Landon Harmon, the concern with him is potentially the lack of control, but we think his stuff and his movement can both be fine. He's going to need to develop the curve or the change to potentially be a starter. But in the second round, I don't think he's horrible value. And can probably say the same thing about Vaughn Necker. Also going to be reliant on developing a curve and a change in his case to potentially be a starter. The control is a concern, but the stuff and movement could both be good. Our scout recommends Joseph Chirotto, center fielder. Don't hate him. I mean, he's got contact. He's solid defensively, a little bit of speed. The power's brutal, but he does have a good eye to draw some walks. I think it's Harmon or Chirotto. Be interesting to see who the scouting director thinks we should do if we do a pitcher, and he's aligned with Harmon. So he's telling us if you go with a pitcher, go with Harmon. If you go with a hitter, go with Chirotto. Now I've just got to make that decision. And those of you who have watched me over the years in my various series probably know where this is going. If there is a pitcher with high work ethic and high intelligence versus a position player who has questionable work ethic, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to go with the pitcher. I tend to try to build a good pitching staff in OOTP, and an easier way to do that is to draft a ton of pitchers and hope that the numbers work in your favor. But in this case, since this isn't a long-term save, I'm going to try something a little different. I can't say I never, but I very rarely will draft a player with a low work ethic. So I kind of want to see what we can do with Chiodoto over the next few seasons. We've got a decent investment in player development, and we've also got the new player development lab open. So I want to see if you put a player with low work ethic through the player development lab, what the chance of success is for that player. So we're actually going to go with Chiodoto here. Looking for slot, and we will welcome him onto the team. I do like his ability to make contact and his ability to draw walks. He could be a on-base machine, admittedly with very limited power, if he fully develops. And we'll see whether we can overcome that poor work ethic. And as luck would turn out with our supplemental pick for the loss of Clay Holmes here at the end of the second round, Landon Harmon still on the board. So we're going to bring him onto the squad now. And we got both of our guys in the second round, so feel good about that. And we've made it to the All-Star game, or more accurately, the announcement of the All-Star teams. Our new ace, Blake Snell, 11-5 with a 2.51 ERA, not surprisingly named a starting pitcher for the game. Other than that, only one other Yankee, Juan Soto, hitting 267, 21 homers, and 51 ribbies, also named to the All-Star team. But Soto and Snell is it, or are it, for the Yankees All-Stars here in 2045. As we prepare for the All-Star break, Aaron Judge is now healthy, just got healthy today, so we sent him on a rehab assignment to AAA Albany. Hopefully they'll be playing a game over the next couple of days, although I'm not sure whether they're on a little break right now or not also. But would love to have him get a little bit of action before we put him back onto the roster after the All-Star break. Taking a look at the standings, still in fourth place, 51-46, 5 games back, and still a game and a half out of the final wild card spot. So given where we started this season, we're really not in a bad spot. And the good news is that Scranton was playing games, so Aaron Judge was able to rehab a little bit. The bad news is that he just suffered an oblique strain, so he's going to be out for another 2 weeks, 1 to 2 weeks. So we're going to just put him right back on the IL and hopefully have him back before the end of the month. Would have loved to have him in the roster for a week or so before we get to the trade deadline. Still expecting that he'll be back with us in August and September. But at this point, his season has definitely been decimated by injuries. Just 143 at-bats and 7 home runs here as we close in on the end of July. And we've been playing pretty well with a 5-1 record since the All-Star break. If we can win tonight, we'll have swept the Red Sox at home, which is always a good feeling. We're thinking about the trade market. One guy on the trade block intrigues us a little bit. David Bednar, the excellent relief pitcher who is with the Cardinals now. I think he could definitely help our bullpen. He's not making a ton of money, even with the fact that we've signed all of our drafted players, and it was more than we had anticipated. We've got about $3.8 million, which would work out perfectly to get him on board with his salary, given that we're well past the midway point of the season now. But right now they're still asking for a little much for him for our tastes, hoping maybe the price gets a little bit better. The Cardinals are 10 games out. I think if they're still holding on to him 4 or 5 days from now, might be a chance for us to get him at a better price. We're in third place now, 4.5 back, and we actually have a 2.5 game lead now for the final wild card spot. So feeling like we're in a pretty good spot with the team largely healthy, with the exception of Judge, kind of finally firing on all cylinders. Don't think we need to be too crazy about what we do. Thinking about next year, our starting catcher, Jose Trevino, has reached out to us about an extension. He's set to become a free agent. I like his glove. The bat, not necessarily perfect. In a perfect world, I think he would be a bench player. But he's hitting .250 for us this year, 7 homers and 252 at-bats, 79 WRC plus, which is by far his best of the last 3 seasons. I mean, quite honestly, if he was going to hit like that, we would bring him back in a second. He's not looking for crazy money, $4.3 million, so about what he's making right now. We'll probably be able to get him back for even less than that. So I don't know that he's necessarily our starter next year, but I would like to at least have a really good defensive catcher who could be a good solid backup for us locked in. So we're going to offer him $3.75 million, so a little over $500,000 less than he's asking for. And he wants more than that. Probably doesn't want to take a pay cut from where he is this year, which I get. Nobody likes to take a pay cut, but sometimes it's what you have to do. And he's pretty insistent. We'll offer him $4.15 million, but we're kind of insistent that he needs to take a pay cut if he's going to come back. And he's pretty insistent that he wants exactly $4.32 million next year. I don't like the way he's negotiating with us, so we're going to put this on the back burner right now. Focus more on getting ready for the trade deadline in a few days. And with just a few days left until the trade deadline, we're third in the AL East, 4 back of the Rays. And with Aaron Judge reportedly just a couple days away from potentially returning from his injury, Everson Pereira making a strong case to stay on the roster. Just won the American League Player of the Week, hitting .500, 4 homers and 12 ribbies. And he's hitting .350, 12 homers, 37 ribbies, and 120 at-bats. So it's going to be very hard for us to get rid of him. As we talked about in the last episode, he's not necessarily a perfect defensive center fielder, but we felt like he would potentially hit much more than Trent Grisham, and that has certainly been true with Pereira putting up a ridiculous .202 WRC plus. Grisham, on the other hand, this season is still struggling mightily with a 151 average and 79 strikeouts and 304 at-bats. The 43 WRC plus is sadly a significant improvement, but I think I'm going to be hard-pressed to send Pereira down when Judge is ready to come back. So we're going to have an interesting roster decision to make shortly. The positive thing is that we are close to the trade deadline, so we're not going to be quite as limited in terms of having to find someone who's got options to get him down to AAA. If we decide that the guy we want to send to AAA to make room for Judge is someone who doesn't have any options left, we can try to trade him and see what we can get. And the price for David Bednar has come down just a bit. They're still looking for some of the top players or top prospects in our system, but they'll also take the veteran shortstop, Kevin Smith, who's kind of stuck in a utility infielder role for us in AAA Scranton Wilkes-Barre. Like having him around. He's a good insurance policy, but Bednar is a guy who can certainly help us in our bullpen immediately. So to me, it makes sense to probably make this trade here. I am also at the point where I'm thinking we may look to move on from Oswaldo Cabrera to make room on the roster for Judge. So if there's a way to get the deal done with him rather than Smith, I might do it, although Cabrera still has option years left and he's younger than Smith, so I guess it probably will just make more sense to include Smith in the deal, send Cabrera down to AAA, and make room for Judge that way. And we've made it past the trade deadline. The Bednar deal was the only one that we did, and we've already installed him as our closer. So that certainly strengthens our bullpen by moving Matan into a setup role. So hopefully the bullpen will be even better going forward. Everson Pereira just concluded an incredible month. We talked about earlier how he was player of the week at one point. He also just won batter of the month and the top rookie in the American League here in the month of July. So he is making a very strong case to remain in the lineup. Aaron Judge has played one game on his latest rehab assignment and appears to be relatively healthy. So we'll probably be bringing him up now. Which means Cabrera is going to go back down to AAA. Weakens our infield depth a little bit, but I kind of like the offense if everyone is firing on all cylinders now. We haven't made huge changes, but I do think that each of the three trades that we ended up making have incrementally improved our team. And as we sit here on August 1st, we've got a 60-50 record, only 2.5 games behind in the division. We're up 2 for the final wild card. And we continue to have really turned this season around. 16-9 record in the month of July, so not quite as great as we were in the month of June, but still have definitely turned the season around. Ranked 6th in the American League in runs scored and 5th in runs allowed. So we're in the top half of the league in both of those categories. Our bullpen ERA, which was something that Hal Steinbrenner was very focused on me improving this year, is third in the AL at 3.41, and certainly the addition of Bednar should not hurt that. We're only one game behind Pythagorean expectations, but as we sit here on August 1st, feeling pretty confident that we are going to guide this team back into the playoffs, assuming that we don't have any significant injuries the rest of the way, and with how banged up Judge has been, that could be a dangerous assumption. And of course, now that we're past the trade deadline, Aaron Judge quickly banged up again. Did hit one home run in the brief time he was back, but going to be out for about 5 weeks with a sprained ankle. So at this point, just have to hope that we can hold on to a playoff spot with this Yankees team and that Judge will get a couple of weeks of action in September and be healthy for the playoffs. But it's been pretty much a lost season for Aaron here in 2025. And unfortunately, another week, another injury, and this is a guy who ended up playing a reasonably important role for us this year. Nick Ahmed, who we picked up as a minor league free agent signing out with a torn labrum, so his Yankees career is likely over. He's going to miss a good chunk of next year. He wasn't happy at first with his role, which was as our starting shortstop against left-handed pitching, but he eventually settled in and was reasonably productive. Put up a 74 WRC plus and 169 at bats, while being a very good defensive shortstop and an occasional substitute for us in the late innings against right-handed pitching at shortstop. So certainly not great that he's gone. Clearly we'll be bringing Mr. Cabrera back from AAA to play a more prominent role with Ahmed out, and we'll have to shuffle the infield around. Volpe's been our second baseman for much of this year. He could find himself back at short now, but a little disappointing. He was having a nice year for us after we picked him up off of the scrap heap, so to speak, and it's unfortunate that he won't be around for a potential playoff run. And has usually been the case this season, we've got some good news and some bad news. The good news is we've continued to play pretty good baseball here in the month of August. And as we sit here on August 25th, we are actually in first place, having won 4 games in a row, half a game up on the Rays and a game and a half on the Orioles. So still a very tight race for the American League East. But the Orioles are 2.5 free of the Tigers for the final wild card spot, along with the Twins. So we're 4 games up on just getting into the playoffs at this point. So feeling like we've definitely turned this season around. Had some bad luck at the beginning of the year, and then I think some of the additions that we've added to the team are making a big difference. Both players we brought on through trade, as well as Everson Pereira, who's still hitting .338, 17 homers, and 57 ribbies in just 201 at-bats. So he has certainly been a revelation. But you knew that some bad news was coming, and that is that Sean Manaea, who we picked up and who has done a reasonably good job for us. A 5-2 record is really good. The 4.94 ERA, not as great, but he's going to be out for about 6 weeks with shoulder tendonitis. So if we do make it to the playoffs, there's a reasonable chance we could have him back as our 4th starter. If not, Clark Schmidt or Marcus Stroman will likely end up in that role. We brought Manaea on for depth in the rotation in case we had some injuries, and also thought he was better than Stroman or Schmidt. But it turns out that he's the one who actually incurred the injury, which will give Schmidt a chance to likely move back into the rotation. And we made it to September roster expansion. Judge is still about a week away, and Manaea still a month-ish away from being able to return. We're still in first place, a game up on the Rays, 2.5 up on the Orioles, and the Orioles look like they're tied with the Tigers for the final wild card spot, just half a game above the Astros, 2.5 up on the Mariners, 3.5 on the Red Sox. So there's actually still a lot of teams fighting for those 3 wild card spots in the American League. Although our lead in the division is not incredible, can't really be much smaller than it is at only 1 game. Certainly feel like we want to win the division at this point. Stay out of that big mess of 7 or 8 teams who are fighting and within 5 games of one another for that those 3 wild card spots. And we're only a little bit off of being in that mess. So hopefully when we get Judge back, he'll be healthy the rest of the way, and he'll make up for some lost time with some big production. Would be great. He's got 8 homers right now. If he could be approaching 15 by the end of this year, that'll mean he probably has a pretty productive stretch for us over the last month or so of the season. And with the trades away of LeMahieu and Conforto, and the fact that Judge has spent most of this second half of the year on the IL, We had Wells and Pereira on the team most of this season at this point. So when we get to September call-ups, probably not as deep a pool as we would normally be pulling from. Bringing up the young catcher Carlos Narvaez to give ourselves a little more depth there, and then Jahmai Jones to be a utility infielder for us. Pitching-wise, brought up Will Warren and Scott Efros from AAA, so can't say that there's any blue-chip prospects that we brought up. Checking in, Bednar's been excellent for us, hasn't allowed a run in 10 innings pitched, and he's picked up 8 saves for us, so he has done a really good job. We know that Manaea is on the IL. As far as the addition of Brandon Drury, he's hitting only 194 for us, so quite honestly, he hasn't really been any more productive than DJ LeMahieu was, but at the very least, we've only got Drury on our team for another month or so, and we're out of the majority of that DJ LeMahieu contract for next year. And certainly, after we just lost Nick Ahmed, just lost Anthony Volpe for 4 weeks, torn ligament in his thumb. So that is going to leave a really big hole in our middle infield with now Volpe as well as Ahmed out. Volpe 249 average, 18 homers, 33 steals, put up a 116 WRC plus and a 4.5 WAR. So the season was really a bit of a kind of coming out party for Volpe. The first year in the majors, where he was a well above average offensive player, and he was also adding a lot of value there at second base, where we had pivoted him for most of this season. So hopefully we'll have him back for the playoffs, but certainly disappointing that we won't get to see him over this last month of the season. And it's another gap in our lineup. We're 2 games up on the Rays after having just won this first game of September, but we're in a real big battle. And right now, the injuries with Volpe joining Manaea, Ahmed, and Judge on the IL are starting to add up. And the first week of September is in the books. We've got a 1.5 game lead on the Rays. The Orioles have dropped back to 4 behind, and they're actually 2.5 out of the wild card at this point. So some of the teams in the other divisions have really come on over the last month or so. Hopefully we can hold on to the division. The magic number is down to 19. Taking a look at the schedule, we've got 3 games at home against Baltimore towards the end of the month. Those could be pretty important. We don't have any games left with the Rays at this point. We've got the Nationals, the Phillies, and Milwaukee this week. So a lot of action against the National League teams. Nationals pretty much out of it. Philadelphia is still fighting for a wild card spot, and Milwaukee is in a wild card spot right now. So hopefully we can get a W against the Nationals before beginning those series against the more difficult teams. Checking in on the injury situation. We think Judge is only a day away, but who knows with the way this season has gone. And another day, another injury. Marcus Stroman out for 4 months, so his season is over. I think it's extremely likely he'll opt into that $18 million deal for next year. Torn labrum, so have him back for spring training. Finishes the year 7-10 with a 4.48 ERA. He was below replacement level when all was said and done. Question whether Manaea is going to be ready for the playoffs. He's still 4 weeks away, so it's pretty unlikely, which could mean that our 4th starter is going to be Clark Schmidt, who has not had a big-time year for us thus far. And after a brutal start to the season, the Yankees at 82-67 have clinched a winning record with 13 games to go. And we're 2 games up on Tampa Bay for the AL East crown. The issue is that Tampa Bay's not even in a wild card spot at this point. So if we don't hold on to the division, it's very conceivable that we will miss the playoffs. And as you might expect, given the way this season has gone, particularly these last couple months have gone, just suffered the one injury that we really couldn't afford to have. I guess that's not technically true, because with Stroman and Manaea on the IL already, losing Cole or Snell would have potentially been crippling. But at least those guys are only going to play every 5 days. Yeah, you guessed it. Juan Soto out for the year. Injured his elbow while walking into a tree while talking on his cell phone. So he's gone for 4 weeks, which is certainly the rest of this regular season. If we do get in the playoffs, he'll certainly miss a wild card series and almost certainly miss a division series. If we somehow end up fortunate to get into the ALCS chance, maybe we'd have him back then. But given that we've still got a lot of work to do over these last 13 games with just a 2-game lead, the loss of our best hitter is, as the kids say, not optimal. So as we try to hold on to the AL East over these last 2 weeks of the season, we're missing our 4th starter in Manaea, our 5th starter in Stroman, starting second baseman and leadoff hitter in Anthony Volpe, best defensive shortstop, who was our starter against left-handed pitching in Nick Ahmed, and the best hitter on our entire team in Juan Soto. Hopefully we've got the depth to get us through this. Would really be painful to miss the playoffs with a 3rd straight year for the Yankees. Obviously only the 2nd that we're playing with them, but I have to acknowledge that the 82-80 record in 2023 under Brian Cashman was not a playoff season either. But we got a chance. Now it's just a matter of going out and doing it on the field over these last 2 weeks of the season. And looking at the schedule, I don't like this. This is just a minor issue, but I've noticed that rather than Friday, Saturday, Sunday series, for some reason in OOTP here in 2025, they've got the schedules being Saturday, Sunday, and Monday series, which I don't think baseball has changed to. It's been Friday, Saturday, Sunday series for as long as I can remember. So hopefully that's just a little quirk in the game that will also get cleaned up down the line. We've got one against Milwaukee, and then we're at the A's and at the Red Sox this week before the final homestand of the season. Taking a look at the standings, Milwaukee, as we talked about last week, is a team that is in a wild card position right now. Oakland, one of the worst teams in baseball. And Boston is still in the race for a wild card. Very unlikely that they'll get it, but certainly they would enjoy ruining our chances, or at least lessening our chances of getting to the postseason. And unfortunately, it was a rough week for us. We lost the final game of the homestand to Milwaukee to drop that series. We lost 2 out of 3 in Oakland against the hapless A's, and we split the first 2 in Boston. So just 7 games left at this point, and we have dropped out of first place. We're a game behind the Rays now, and we're 1 game up on the Astros for the last wild card spot in the American League. So hopefully we can do better this final week of the season. Would be a bitter disappointment to miss out on the playoffs, and it's not a great schedule for us. Final road game of the regular season at Boston, and then 3 at home against Baltimore and 3 at home against the Braves. Baltimore still lurking in the playoff race, and the Braves at 99-56 have the best record in all of baseball. And fortunately, we did get a great outing from Garrett Cole in the final game against the Red Sox. 4 hits, 1 walk, 7 strikeouts over 8 innings. Dropped his ERA on the year to 2.83. Bednar came on and picked up his 13th save for us. So with 6 games to go, we are tied with the Rays for first. And we're also in a 3-way tie for the final wild card spot, but it's really a 2-way tie because either us or the Rays will likely win the AL East, although Baltimore is still mathematically in the race. Still 1 game up on the Astros for that final wild card spot. So this series against Baltimore right here is going to be huge. If we can take 2 out of 3 here, we can get the Baltimore Orioles out of the race for the division and quite honestly out of the race for the wild card too. And 2 out of 3 wins against them would go a long way towards us securing at least a wild card spot and hopefully the division. And we did take 2 out of 3 against Baltimore. We did it the hard way, losing the first game in the series. So 3 games left this season against the Atlanta Braves. Kind of odd to be finishing the season against a National League team. And as I mentioned, kind of odd with a series that is scheduled for Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. But it is what it is at this point. Taking a look at the standings here with 3 games to go, we are 1 up on the Rays, and the Rays are in a flat-footed tie with the Twins and the Astros for the final 2 wild card spots. So everyone else has been eliminated. Essentially, there are 7 teams in the American League battling for 6 playoff spots. The Guardians and the Rangers have already clinched their divisions. So it's a battle between us and the Rays here for the AL East. Atlanta at 102-57 has clinched the best record in baseball, so perhaps they won't have as much to play for. And we've got a great pitching matchup. We've got Garrett Cole on the mound against Max Fried here for the first game of this series. See what happens as we try to guide these Yankees into the playoffs. Try to guide them to a 90-win season if we can sweep the Braves. But things are moving slowly here, and unfortunately we lose 6-4 to the Braves. Bednar tagged with the loss. Cole, quality start. Bednar with clearly his worst outing since he joined us. So that's not great. Tampa Bay, of course, won, so we're tied with them now. Still a 3-way tie for those final 2 wild card spots. Going to have to figure out a way to get a W, and 2 W's would feel a lot better than 1. We've got Rodon on the mound against our old buddy Michael King. And we'll see what happens in the penultimate game of the year. And it was another loss. So it is all falling apart. The Braves have won. We are tied with the Astros for the final wild card spot. So we could really have any result between winning the division to being out of the playoffs, depending on how this final game of the season goes. Volpe's ready to come back, so that's positive. We'll get him into the lineup. It should be positive. Not necessarily positive that Clark Schmidt, who should be working out of the bullpen, is the guy who our season now relies upon here in game number 162. And might as well look right now and see whether we've already lost the division or not. And our Yankees are 6-7 against Tampa, so we've already lost the division. How are we against Houston? We're 4-3 against Houston, so that should mean that we would win a tiebreaker with them. But the division is already gone because we're not going to win a tiebreaker if we end up with the same record as the Rays. So we're going to get Volpe into the lineup and then see what happens here in game 162. Can we get to 88 wins? If we can, we'll be a playoff team. If we lose, we're probably out of the playoffs for a third straight season in New York. And we'll see if we can win this final game of the year. Nope. 6-3 loss. 2 games behind the Rays. And we're out of the playoffs. So a brutal finish to the season. We had a brutal start to the season, starting 1-13. We fought all our way back. We're in first place for much of August and most of September. And then the injuries just crushed us down the stretch. And an 87-75 season, although it's an improvement from last year, is a bitter, bitter disappointment. The injuries certainly didn't help, but you lose 3 in a row at home to an Atlanta team that, albeit a great team, is playing for absolutely nothing, and you deserve to lose. So in the first 14 games of this season, we were 1-13. The final 3 games, we were 0-3. Other than that, we were an 86-59 team. Pretty darn good besides that, but doesn't matter. Our Yankees will be missing the playoffs. Taking a look at the team statistics, of course, as we miss the playoffs by 1 game, we were 1 game below Pythagorean expectations, but after a great June and a very good July and August, 10-14 in September, choked it away down the stretch. Middle of the pack in terms of runs scored, but we were missing Judge most of the year. Ended up 3rd in the American League in runs allowed, although our bullpen ERA slipped to 7th, so we're not even going to necessarily do that well with ownership. Did improve from 12th, but not as good as we would have hoped. So a pretty bitter, disappointing end to this season that felt we could have gotten this team back to the playoffs, and it didn't end up working out for us. Positively, we're going to have some money to spend this upcoming off season. I'm sure Stroman's going to opt into that contract, but we'll move on from Cronenworth. Have a decision to make on Bednar. Got to figure out a way to keep Aaron Judge healthy. Felt like if he got to 15 homers, that would probably help propel us to the playoffs. But he ended up getting only to 11, 215 average, 11 homers and 27 ribbies and 209 at-bats. Missed over 100 games. Below average offensive player with a 91 WRC plus. Barely above replacement level. He'll be 34 early next year. He's already fragile physically. And we've got him for another 7 years at $40 million a pop. Life is good for the New York Yankees. And we'll do a full debrief on the season in our next episode as we start planning who should be back with the Yankees next season and who we need to move on from. Volpe finished third in the league in steals. Juan Soto had the best OPS in the league, but that cell phone accident a couple weeks ago certainly didn't help things for us. Cole finished second in the league with a 2.85 ERA, and Blake Snell 14-9 record with a league best 244 strikeouts. So the pitching was good, the hitting was average, the injury situation was disastrous. And when all was said and done, the Yankees are once again watching the playoffs in October. Until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.